Welcome to Cancer HealthCast, where science is driving hope. I'm Ross Joffrey today. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Christine Alewine. Dr. Alewine is an NIH Lasker Scholar in the Laboratory of Molecular Biology, the Center for Cancer Research within the National Cancer Institute. Thank you so much for joining me.
I'm delighted to be here.
So tell me a little bit about your role at the National Cancer Institute and relatedly, any initiatives that you're currently working on to advance pancreatic cancer research.
So I am a medical oncologist, which means that I treat people that are diagnosed with cancer. I specialize in GI cancers, specifically in pancreas cancer. And so I have early stage clinical trials where we're looking at novel new drugs that could potentially help patients who have advanced pancreas cancer. I also have a small lab where in general we look at combinations of those drugs to try and see if we can come up with something that could be more efficacious.
What are the different types of pancreatic cancer and what are some of the tools being used to detect the disease early?
Yeah. So pancreas cancer, when we talk about it, and people just say the word pancreas cancer without specifying anything else, they're usually talking about pancreatic adenocarcinoma. So about 85 to 90% of all pancreas cancers are of the adenocarcinoma kind, and that's the one that dominates the statistics and what people mean unless they specify other words with there. So there are also a group of pancreatic cancers that arise from the neuroendocrine cells of the pancreas, and they're called PNETs, or pancreatic neuroendocrine tumors. And that's about 5 to 10% of pancreas cancers. And then there's another group of very rare tumors that, like the pancreas adenocarcinoma, they come from the part of the pancreas that is important in making digestive enzymes, but they're rarer and a little stranger than the adenocarcinoma we're used to seeing. So those are the different types. Like you were saying, diagnosing pancreas cancer usually happens pretty late. And so by late, what I mean is that most patients that are diagnosed, their tumor has grown to a point where we can't cure it, either because it's grown into important structures that can't be cut out, and you need surgery in part to cure pancreas cancer, or it's spread to distant organs. And once again, you can't cut it out. So, why does that happen? So when you're talking about trying to find a pancreas cancer early, the symptoms that people have, a lot of times they don't come up until it's more advanced. And so people just don't know it's there. Some people are lucky enough that it still is in what we call early stages when they're diagnosed and they have the potential for cure. One of the most important things to point out, though, is that although we talk about pancreas cancer having a bad prognosis because most people get diagnosed late, we don't do a great job of curing people with early stage disease either. And so it's maybe not even 30% of patients with early stage disease are cured of it. So we still have a lot of work to do for all of that.
So regarding detecting the disease early and sort of relatedly, research does suggest that genetics are more closely tied to cancer than perhaps previously thought. So a patient experiencing pancreas cancer, why is it important for that person to have a conversation about genetic testing with their medical doctors?
Yeah. So it's a new recommendation as of a few years ago for all patients with pancreas cancer to have that conversation. In the past, we've thought that if you didn't have other family members with pancreas cancer, it was unlikely that it was caused in you by a gene that was passed down, from your parents or other people in your family, or that you had. And now we understand that there are a good number of people who are diagnosed with pancreas cancer where they don't have other family members that have the disease, but they do have a gene that can be passed on to their children. because it can be, maybe even as high as 15% of people who have pancreas cancer. It's now recommended that we talk to patients about that to see whether it's something that's worth them getting tested. A lot of the times that depends on whether they have other close family members who could be affected and could potentially join a screening program to make sure that their pancreas cancer gets detected as early as possible, when it's still curable, if they were to get the disease.
What are the current standards of care at all stages of pancreas cancer? And can you tell us more about the mRNA vaccine and the other advances in immunotherapy that could potentially help with a cure?
Okay, so pancreas cancer is treated. We sort of think of it as having three different treatment paradigms. So there's the patients that have disease that's confined to the pancreas, and that surgeons can take out. The standard of care is for those patients to get surgery followed by chemotherapy as an insurance against the disease coming back anywhere else. We know that with surgery alone, it definitely does come back. Um, right now, officially, one's supposed to get their chemotherapy after surgery, but there are a lot of studies going on to find out if giving the chemotherapy before surgery might actually be more beneficial and cure more patients. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is that after the surgery, it's harder for people to tolerate the chemotherapy and to do well on it than maybe beforehand. And the other is since we know that there's little seeds of cancer that are out there that we can't see, even in patients, who have early stage disease, if we were to treat those with the chemotherapy as soon as possible, that maybe that would keep them from growing. Whereas, surgery would not be treating those. But we're still waiting to see which side of the surgery chemo should be given on. Then there are patients who their tumor, we can only see that it's in the pancreas, but it's grown into some important vessels that are nearby. And so the surgeons they can't really remove it very easily. So in those patients, they get chemotherapy first to see if we can shrink the tumor enough that the surgeons can remove all of it. And then the last group of patients are those where we know that the pancreas cancer is already spread beyond the pancreas. We know that we don't have a treatment right now that can cure them, but the chemotherapy treatments that we do have can help them to live longer and can also reduce their symptoms. And so I think the thing that you've noticed that I've said in all three cases is that chemotherapy, chemotherapy, chemotherapy. We've not had a lot of success in pancreas cancer in having targeted therapies or immunotherapies work. So right now, there's a small number of patients, so less than 1%, who have what we call microsatellite instability, where something like an immunotherapy that causes the immune system to attack the cancer can actually be very beneficial. And there's a reasonable number of patients, probably somewhere between 5 and 10%, who have mutations in their tumor that cause them to have problems with repairing their DNA. And they can use a specific targeted drug called a PARP inhibitor in addition to chemotherapy to help control the tumor. But there's not historically been a lot of other treatments other than chemotherapy for pancreas cancer. That's begun to change. There are now new KRAS inhibitor drugs that are coming out in trial, and we're expecting could be helpful in almost all pancreas cancer patients because over 90% of pancreas adenocarcinoma has that mutation, and these drugs could be helpful for that. And there's also very recently, like you were talking about, been some interesting, very early stage studies where patients with resectable disease that the surgeons can come in and take out have been able to get vaccine against things that are in their tumor that are not part of the regular cells in their body. And it looks like in these early stage tumors that maybe patients could be living longer, but it's hard to know because there's no comparison group right now. So, what do I mean by that with what's a cancer vaccine? So the difference, between a vaccine that we give for something like COVID or infectious diseases is that you're giving a vaccine to boost the immune system against something that a person doesn't yet have. So a virus that they're not infected with. When we're giving vaccines in cancer, we're trying to boost the immune system to fight against the cancer that's already there, if that makes any sense. And so if you're trying to make a vaccine against a cancer that's already in the body, these are all the same person's cells, right? So how are they different than the regular cells? So you have to you have to find the things that are different about the new cells, and you have to point them out to the immune system so that they can tell the difference between what are good cells and what are bad cancer cells, so that the immune system can then come and fight them. And these new data are making us think that maybe in early stage disease, when people don't have anything that's big enough that we can see on imaging studies or that we can really know is there, that the immune system can be revved up to fight those little tiny pockets of tumor that we can't see, but we know are there and are going to come back and kill somebody.
That's absolutely interesting to hear about the ways that the immune system, will be used to move within cancer treatments, particularly with regards to pancreas cancer. For my own edification, the immune system absolutely fascinates me. It's completely interesting, especially when it comes to these cancers or things that are not resectable, not able to be removed. Before we conclude, is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like our listeners to know about?
So the first thing is that with what I was just talking about, we're talking specifically about the most common kind of pancreas cancer, which is pancreas adenocarcinoma. There's other ways that those other types of pancreas cancer that we mentioned get treated, and they're not necessarily the same. So those are sort of important considerations there. The other thing is that one of the ways where we could help more people is if there were more people who were able to be diagnosed earlier in this process. And there's a lot of work being done to try and find a blood test or some kind of screening test that would allow us to find people with pancreas cancer earlier. The biggest problem is although pancreas cancer is now the third leading cause of cancer death in the US, it's still a very rare tumor. And so anytime you make a test, there's a certain rate of telling somebody that they don't have the disease that you're looking for when they actually do, or of telling them that they do have the disease, or they might, when they actually don't. And when there's only a very small number of people in the population that you're testing, how good your test has to be gets much, much harder in order for it to be efficient, right? Because who wants to be told that they might have pancreas cancer and then find out that they don't? So even if the test is 99% good, if you're giving it to everyone in the general population, you'd have to, for every one real case of pancreas cancer you'd find, you would have to tell about 90 people that they might have pancreas cancer when they don't. And so those odds aren't very good. So the way to put those odds in our favor is to try and find which groups of people are at highest risk for getting pancreas cancer, because then the chances of that happening get smaller because the number of people that you're testing is smaller and the chance of them having the disease is higher. So one of the things that's been noticed, besides that there are families that have pancreas cancer that runs through them that, already can go to centers to get screening for pancreas cancer, is that there's probably about 1% of patients who have new diagnosis of diabetes. And it's not your normal run-of-the-mill diabetes. It's actually being caused by pancreas cancer, because the cells that help control that make insulin that helps control your sugar are in the pancreas, and pancreas cancer affects them. So there's new initiatives to test these new sampling methods to try and find pancreas cancer early, specifically in people who have a new diagnosis of diabetes, because there's certain people that are hiding in that group that actually have diabetes because they have pancreas cancer. But most of them don't. 99% of them don't, but 1% of people with new diagnosis of diabetes may have pancreas cancer. And so there's a lot of focus on that population to try and find a test that can diagnose pancreas cancer early.
Early diagnosis seems to be one of the key points here, and that's certainly something that we'll be following. And absolutely interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things is even if you say that one of these tests come back early, the next step of that is trying to figure out how do you find the cancer that's there. And so one of the most difficult things with pancreas cancer, even people who we think have it, is many times our CT scans or MRIs, it's very hard to tell that there's something there in the pancreas. It's a really difficult place to image. And that's, sort of how we find it's there. And so there's a lot of efforts by radiologists to make new artificial intelligence computer programs that can help them to distinguish a tumor in the pancreas, even when it's smaller than what, or it's too difficult for human eyes to see. And that's another important step that's needed in order for us to really be able to diagnose people well. Because even if the blood test is positive, if you can't figure out where it is or where it's there, then, it's hard to know whether to move forward.
Yeah, you can't treat what you can't find, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The biggest news out there right now is definitely the KRAS inhibitors, because we've been waiting 50 years for something to drug the undruggable target. The pharmaceutical companies had all given up on it. And, now, the first of those, the G12C inhibitors, are already approved by the FDA for lung cancer. There's only 3% of pancreas cancer patients that have that particular mutation. But the new ones that have just started in clinical trial now are directed at the KRAS mutations that most pancreas cancer patients have. And so everyone in the field is very excited to see what's going to happen with those, and so it's definitely something where we feel like we're on the brink of something changing, where we'd have more than chemotherapy to offer.
Yeah, chemotherapy is certainly nothing easy, and not something I think anyone wants to jump into quickly.
It's really kind of crazy, because even, the biggest advance on that side was, really when the FOLFIRINOX regimen came out about 10 or 12 years ago. And it's a 3 chemo drug regimen that's people have to get every 2 weeks and carry around a fanny pack. And it has a risk of people dying from sepsis, and it causes nausea and, diarrhea and all sorts of symptoms. And, it does extend survival in pancreas cancer. And one of the things that many people said was, how is this actually making people feel better? It's not curing them when you're giving it to patients who have disease that's grown beyond the pancreas. But surprisingly, when the quality of life survey was done as part of the original study, patients who got the chemo had a better quality of life than those that didn't. And, I sort of felt that was very telling. It says a lot about how miserable having pancreas cancer makes you feel when it's not under control. It actually, if people who are getting this very rigorous chemotherapy regimen and it's working against their cancer, are telling you that they're feeling better than the people who are getting a less effective, less toxic single agent. And that's, yeah.
Well, Dr. Alewine, thanks so much for being on the show with us.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
HealthCast, along with GovCast and Cybercast, is a production of GovCIO Media and Research. For more podcasts and to check out the other shows, head to govciomedia.com. Watch out for new episodes released every Tuesday and Wednesday across our shows. You can follow all of them on your favorite podcast platform. And if you like what you heard, make sure to let us know by leaving a review. And if you have any topics you think we should look into, contact us at newsletter@govcio.com.